This is a Willow audiobook. A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Read by Stephen Alexander. Chapter 8. In the Attic. The first night she spent in her attic was a thing Sara never forgot. During its passing, she lived through a wild, unchildlike woe of which she never spoke to anyone about her. There was no one who would have understood. It was indeed well for her that as she lay awake in the darkness, her mind was forcibly distracted now and then by the strangeness of her surroundings. It was perhaps well for her that she was reminded by her small body of material things. If this had not been so, the anguish of her young mind might have been too great for a child to bear. But really, while the night was passing, she scarcely knew that she had a body at all, or remembered any other thing than one. "My papa is dead," she kept whispering to herself. "My papa is dead." It was not until long afterward that she realized that her bed had been so hard that she turned over and over in it to find a place to rest, that the darkness seemed more intense than any she had ever known, and that the wind howled over the roof among the chimneys like something which wailed aloud. Then there was something worse. This was certain scufflings and scratchings and squeakings in the walls and behind the skirting boards. She knew what they meant, because Becky had described them. They meant rats and mice who were either fighting with each other or playing together. Once or twice she even heard sharp-toed feet scurrying across the floor. And she remembered in those after days when she recalled things that when first she heard them, she started up in bed and sat trembling, and when she lay down again, covered her head with the bedclothes. The change in her life did not come about gradually, but was made all at once. "She must begin as she is to go on," Miss Minchin said to Miss Amelia. "She must be taught at once what she is to expect." Mariette had left the house the next morning. The glimpse Sara caught of her sitting-room as she passed its open door showed her that everything had been changed. Her ornaments and luxuries had been removed, and a bed had been placed in a corner to transform it into a new pupil's bedroom. When she went down to breakfast, she saw that her seat at Miss Minchin's side was occupied by Lavinia, and Miss Minchin spoke to her coldly. "You will begin your new duties, Sara," she said, "by taking your seat with the younger children at a smaller table. You must keep them quiet, and see that they behave well, and do not waste their food. You ought to have been down earlier. Lottie has already upset her tea." That was the beginning, and from day to day the duties given to her were added to. She taught the younger children French and heard their other lessons, and these were the least of her labours. It was found that she could be made use of in numberless directions. She could be sent on errands at any time and in all weathers. She could be told to do things other people neglected. The cook and the housemaids took their tone from Miss Minchin, and rather enjoyed ordering about the young one who had been made so much fuss over for so long. They were not servants of the best class, and had neither good manners nor good tempers, and it was frequently convenient to have at hand someone on whom blame could be laid. During the first month or two, Sara thought that her willingness to do things as well as she could, and her silence under reproof, might soften those who drove her so hard. In her proud little heart, she wanted them to see that she was trying to earn her living and not accepting charity. But the time came when she saw that no one was softened at all, and the more willing she was to do as she was told, the more domineering and exacting careless housemaids became, and the more ready a scolding cook was to blame her. If she had been older, Miss Minchin would have given her the bigger girls to teach and saved money by dismissing an instructress. But while she remained and looked like a child, she could be made more useful as a sort of little superior errand girl and maid of all work. An ordinary errand boy would not have been so clever and reliable. Sara could be trusted with difficult commissions and complicated messages. She could even go and pay bills, and she combined with this the ability to dust a room well and to set things in order. Her own lessons became things of the past. She was taught nothing, and only after long and busy days spent in running here and there at everybody's orders was she grudgingly allowed to go into the deserted schoolroom with a pile of old books and study alone at night. "If I do not remind myself of the things I have learnt, perhaps I may forget them," she said to herself. "I am almost a scullery maid, and if I am a scullery maid who knows nothing, I shall be like poor Becky. I wonder if I could quite forget and begin to drop my H's and not remember that Henry VIII had 6 wives." One of the most curious things in her new existence was her changed position among the pupils. Instead of being a sort of small royal personage among them, she no longer seemed to be one of their number at all. She was kept so constantly at work that she scarcely ever had an opportunity of speaking to any of them, and she could not avoid seeing that Miss Minchin preferred that she should live a life apart from that of the occupants of the schoolroom. "I will not have her forming intimacies and talking to the other children," that lady said. "Girls like a grievance, and if she begins to tell romantic stories about herself, she will become an ill-used heroine, and parents will be given a wrong impression. It is better that she should live a separate life, one suited to her circumstances. I am giving her a home, and that is more than she has any right to expect from me." Sara did not expect much, and was far too proud to try to continue to be intimate with girls who evidently felt rather awkward and uncertain about her. The fact was that Miss Minchin's pupils were a set of dull, matter-of-fact young people. They were accustomed to being rich and comfortable, and as Sara's frocks grew shorter and shabbier and queerer-looking, and it became an established fact that she wore shoes with holes in them, and was sent out to buy groceries and carry them through the streets in a basket on her arm when the cook wanted them in a hurry, they felt rather as if, when they spoke to her, they were addressing an underservant. "To think that she was the girl with the diamond mines," Lavinia commented. "She does look an object, and she's queerer than ever. I never liked her much, but I can't bear that way she has now of looking at people without speaking, just as if she was finding them out." "I am," said Sara promptly when she heard of this. "That's what I look at some people for. I like to know about them. I think them over afterward." The truth was that she had saved herself annoyance several times by keeping her eye on Lavinia, who was quite ready to make mischief and would have been rather pleased to make it for the ex-show pupil. Sara never made any mischief herself or interfered with anyone. She worked like a drudge. She tramped through the wet streets carrying parcels and baskets. She laboured with the childish inattention of the little one's French lessons. As she became shabbier and more forlorn-looking, she was told that she had better take her meals downstairs. She was treated as if she was nobody's concern, and her heart grew proud and sore. But she never told anyone what she felt. "Soldiers don't complain," she would say between her small shut teeth. "I am not going to do it. I will pretend this is part of a war." But there were hours when her child heart might almost have broken with loneliness, but for 3 people. The first, it must be owned, was Becky. Just Becky. Throughout all that first night spent in the garret, she had felt a vague comfort in knowing that on the other side of the wall in which the rats scuffled and squeaked, there was another young human creature. And during the nights that followed, the sense of comfort grew. They had little chance to speak to each other during the day. Each had her own tasks to perform, and any attempt at conversation would have been regarded as a tendency to loiter and lose time. "Don't mind me, miss," Becky whispered during the first morning, "if I don't say nothing polite. Someone'd be down on us if I did. I means please and thank you and beg pardon, but I dasn't to take time to say it." But before daybreak, she used to slip into Sarah's attic and button her dress, and give her such help as she required before she went downstairs to light the kitchen fire. And when night came, Sarah always heard the humble knock at her door, which meant that her handmaid was ready to help her again if she was needed. During the first weeks of her grief, Sarah felt as if she were too stupefied to talk. So it happened that some time passed before they saw each other much or exchanged visits. Becky's heart told her that it was best that people in trouble should be left alone. The second of the trio of comforters was Ermengaard, but odd things happened before Ermengaard found her place. When Sarah's mind seemed to awaken again to the life about her, she realised that she had forgotten that an Ermengaard lived in the world. The two had always been friends, but Sarah had felt as if she were years the older. It could not be contested that Ermengaard was as dull as she was affectionate. She clung to Sarah in a simple, helpless way. She brought her lessons to her that she might be helped. She listened to her every word and besieged her with requests for stories. But she had nothing interesting to say herself, and she loathed books of every description. She was, in fact, not a person one would remember when one was caught in the storm of a great trouble. And Sarah forgot her. It had been all the easier to forget her, because she had been suddenly called home for a few weeks. When she came back, she did not see Sarah for a day or two, and when she met her for the first time, she encountered her coming down a corridor with her arms full of garments which were to be taken downstairs to be mended. Sarah herself had already been taught to mend them. She looked pale and unlike herself, and she was attired in the queer, outgrown frock whose shortness showed so much thin black leg. Ermengaard was too slow a girl to be equal to such a situation. She could not think of anything to say. She knew what had happened, but somehow she had never imagined Sarah could look like this, so odd and poor and almost like a servant. It made her quite miserable, and she could do nothing but break into a short, hysterical laugh and exclaim aimlessly, as if without any meaning, "Oh, Sarah, is that you?" "Yes," answered Sarah, and suddenly a strange thought passed through her mind and made her face flush. She held the pile of garments in her arms, and her chin rested upon the top of it to keep it steady. Something in the look of her straight-gazing eyes made Ermengaard lose her wits still more. She felt as if Sarah had changed into a new kind of girl, and she had never known her before. Perhaps it was because she had suddenly grown poor and had to mend things and work like Becky. Oh, she stammered. How are you?" "I don't know," Sarah replied. "How are you?" I'm quite well," said Ermengaard, overwhelmed with shyness. Then, spasmodically, she thought of something to say which seemed more intimate. Are you very unhappy?" she said in a rush. Then Sarah was guilty of an injustice. Just at that moment her torn heart swelled within her, and she felt that if anyone was as stupid as that, one had better get away from her. "What do you think?" she said. "Do you think I am very happy?" And she marched past her without another word. In course of time, she realised that if her wretchedness had not made her forget things, she would have known that poor, dull Ermengaard was not to be blamed for her unready, awkward ways. She was always awkward, and the more she felt, the more stupid she was given to being. But the sudden thought which had flashed upon her had made her oversensitive. "She is like the others," she had thought. "She does not really want to talk to me. She knows no one does." So for several weeks, a barrier stood between them. When they met by chance, Sarah looked the other way, and Ermengaard felt too stiff and embarrassed to speak. Sometimes they nodded to each other in passing, but there were times when they did not even exchange a greeting. "If she would rather not talk to me," Sara thought, "I will keep out of her way. Miss Minchin makes that easy enough." Miss Minchin made it so easy that at last they scarcely saw each other at all. At that time it was noticed that Ermengaard was more stupid than ever, and that she looked listless and unhappy. She used to sit in the window seat, huddled in a heap, and stare out of the window without speaking. Once Jessie, who was passing, stopped to look at her curiously. "What are you crying for, Ermengaard?" she asked. "I'm not crying," answered Ermengaard in a muffled, unsteady voice. "You are," said Jessie. "A great big tear just rolled down the bridge of your nose and dropped off at the end of it, and there goes another." "Well," said Ermengaard, "I'm miserable, and no one need interfere." And she turned her plump back and took out her handkerchief and boldly hid her face in it. That night, when Sara went to her attic, she was later than usual. She had been kept at work until after the hour at which pupils went to bed, and after that she had gone to her lessons in the lonely schoolroom. When she reached the top of the stairs, she was surprised to see a glimmer of light coming from under the attic door. "Nobody goes there but myself," she thought quickly. "But someone has lighted a candle." Someone had indeed lighted a candle, and it was not burning in the kitchen candlestick she was expected to use, but in one of those belonging to the pupils' bedrooms. The someone was sitting upon the battered footstool, and was dressed in her nightgown and wrapped up in a red shawl. It was Ermengaard. "Ermengaard!" cried Sara. She was so startled that she was almost frightened. "You will get into trouble." Ermengaard stumbled up from her footstool. She shuffled across the attic in her bedroom slippers, which were too large for her. Her eyes and nose were pink with crying. "I know I shall, if I'm found out," she said. "But I don't care. I don't care a bit. Oh, Sara, please tell me. What is the matter? Why don't you like me anymore?" Something in her voice made the familiar lump rise in Sara's throat. It was so affectionate and simple, so like the old Ermengaard who had asked her to be best friends. It sounded as if she had not meant what she had seemed to mean during these past weeks. "I do like you," Sara answered. "I thought, you see, everything is different now. I thought you were different." Ermengaard opened her wet eyes wide. "Why, it was you who were different," she cried. "You didn't want to talk to me. I didn't know what to do. It was you who were different after I came back." Sara thought a moment. She saw she had made a mistake. "I am different," she explained, "though not in the way you think. Miss Minchin does not want me to talk to the girls. Most of them don't want to talk to me. I thought, perhaps, you didn't, so I tried to keep out of your way." "Oh, Sara!" Ermengaard almost wailed in her reproachful dismay. And then, after one more look, they rushed into each other's arms. It must be confessed that Sara's small black head lay for some minutes on the shoulder covered by the red shawl. When Ermengaard had seemed to desert her, she had felt horribly lonely. Afterward they sat down upon the floor together, Sara clasping her knees with her arms, and Ermengaard rolled up in her shawl. Ermengaard looked at the odd, big-eyed little face adoringly. "I couldn't bear it any more," she said. "I dare say you could live without me, Sara, but I couldn't live without you. I was nearly dead. So tonight, when I was crying under the bedclothes, I thought all at once of creeping up here and just begging you to let us be friends again. "You are nicer than I am," said Sara. "I was too proud to try and make friends. You see, now that trials have come, they have shown that I am not a nice child. I was afraid they would. Perhaps," wrinkling her forehead wisely, "that is what they were sent for." "I don't see any good in them," said Ermengaard stoutly. "Neither do I, to speak the truth," admitted Sara frankly. "But I suppose there might be good in things, even if we don't see it. There might," doubtfully, "be good in Miss Minchin." Ermengaard looked round the attic with a rather fearsome curiosity. "Sara," she said, "do you think you can bear living here?" Sara looked round also. "If I pretend it's quite different, I can," she answered. "Or if I pretend it's a place in a story." She spoke slowly. Her imagination was beginning to work for her. It had not worked for her at all since her troubles had come upon her. She had felt as if it had been stunned. "Other people have lived in worse places. Think of the Count of Monte Cristo in the dungeons of the Château d'If, and think of the people in the Bastille." "The Bastille?" half-whispered Ermengaard, watching her and beginning to be fascinated. She remembered stories of the French Revolution which Sara had been able to fix in her mind by her dramatic relation of them. No one but Sara could have done it. A well-known glow came into Sara's eyes. "Yes," she said, hugging her knees. "That will be a good place to pretend about. I am a prisoner in the Bastille. I have been here for years and years and years, and everybody has forgotten about me. Miss Minchin is the jailer, and Becky," a sudden light adding itself to the glow in her eyes, "Becky is the prisoner in the next cell." She turned to Ermengaard, looking quite like the old Sara. "I shall pretend that," she said, "and it will be a great comfort." Ermengaard was at once enraptured and awed. "And will you tell me all about it?" she said. "May I creep up here at night, whenever it is safe, and hear the things you have made up in the day? It will seem as if we were more best friends than ever." "Yes," answered Sara, nodding. "Adversity tries people, and mine has tried you, and proved how nice you are." Chapter 9. Melchizedek. The third person in the trio was Lottie. She was a small thing, and did not know what adversity meant, and was much bewildered by the alteration she saw in her young adopted mother. She had heard it rumoured that strange things had happened to Sara, but she could not understand why she looked different, why she wore an old black frock and came into the schoolroom only to teach, instead of to sit in her place of honour and learn lessons herself. There had been much whispering among the little ones, when it had been discovered that Sara no longer lived in the rooms in which Emily had so long sat in state. Lottie's chief difficulty was that Sara said so little when one asked her questions. At 7, mysteries must be made very clear if one is to understand them. "Are you very poor now, Sara?" she had asked confidentially the first morning her friend took charge of the small French class. "Are you as poor as a beggar?" She thrust a fat hand into the slim one and opened round, tearful eyes. "I don't want you to be as poor as a beggar." She looked as if she was going to cry, and Sara hurriedly consoled her. "Beggars have nowhere to live," she said courageously. "I have a place to live in." "Where do you live?" persisted Lottie. "The new girl sleeps in your room, and it isn't pretty any more." "I live in another room," said Sara. "Is it a nice one?" inquired Lottie. "I want to go and see it." "You must not talk," said Sara. Miss Minchin is looking at us. She will be angry with me for letting you whisper." She had found out already that she was to be held accountable for everything which was objected to. If the children were not attentive, if they talked, if they were restless, it was she who would be reproved. But Lottie was a determined little person. If Sara would not tell her where she lived, she would find out in some other way. She talked to her small companions, and hung about the elder girls and listened when they were gossiping. And, acting upon certain information they had unconsciously let drop, she started late one afternoon on a voyage of discovery, climbing stairs she had never known the existence of, until she reached the attic floor. There she found 2 doors near each other, and opening one, she saw her beloved Sara standing upon an old table and looking out of a window. "Sara!" she cried, aghast. "Mama Sara!" She was aghast because the attic was so bare and ugly and seemed so far away from all the world. Her short legs had seemed to have been mounting hundreds of stairs. Sara turned round at the sound of her voice. It was her turn to be aghast. What would happen now? If Lottie began to cry and anyone chanced to hear, they were both lost. She jumped down from her table and ran to the child. "Don't cry and make a noise," she implored. "I shall be scolded if you do, and I have been scolded all day. It's not such a bad room, Lottie." "Isn't it?" gasped Lottie, and as she looked round it, she bit her lip. She was a spoiled child yet, but she was fond enough of her adopted parent to make an effort to control herself for her sake. Then, somehow, it was quite possible that any place in which Sara lived might turn out to be nice. "Why isn't it, Sara?" she almost whispered. Sara hugged her close and tried to laugh. There was a sort of comfort in the warmth of the plump, childish body. She had had a hard day and had been staring out of the windows with hot eyes. "You can see all sorts of things you can't see downstairs," she said. "What sort of things?" demanded Lottie, with that curiosity Sara could always awaken, even in bigger girls. "Chimneys, quite close to us, with smoke curling up in wreaths and clouds and going up into the sky. And sparrows hopping about and talking to each other just as if they were people. And other attic windows where heads may pop out any minute and you can wonder who they belong to. And it all feels as high up as if it was another world." "Oh, let me see it," cried Lottie. "Lift me up." Sara lifted her up, and they stood on the old table together and leaned on the edge of the flat window in the roof and looked out. Anyone who has not done this does not know what a different world they saw. The slates spread out on either side of them and slanted down into the rain gutter pipes. The sparrows, being at home there, twittered and hopped about quite without fear. 2 of them perched on the chimney top nearest and quarrelled with each other fiercely until one pecked the other and drove him away. The garret window next to theirs was shut because the house next door was empty. "I wish someone lived there," Sara said. "It is so close that if there was a little girl in the attic, we could talk to each other through the windows and climb over to see each other if we were not afraid of falling." The sky seemed so much nearer than when one saw it from the street that Lottie was enchanted. From the attic window among the chimney pots, the things which were happening in the world below seemed almost unreal. One scarcely believed in the existence of Miss Minchin and Miss Amelia and the schoolroom, and the roll of wheels in the square seemed a sound belonging to another existence. "Oh, Sara!" cried Lottie, cuddling in her guarding arm. "I like this attic. I like it. It is nicer than downstairs." "Look at that sparrow," whispered Sara. "I wish I had some crumbs to throw to him." "I have some," came in a little shriek from Lottie. "I have part of a bun in my pocket. I bought it with my penny yesterday and I saved a bit." When they threw out a few crumbs, the sparrow jumped and flew away to an adjacent chimney top. He was evidently not accustomed to intimates in attics, and unexpected crumbs startled him. But when Lottie remained quite still, and Sara chirped very softly, almost as if she were a sparrow herself, he saw that the thing which had alarmed him represented hospitality after all. He put his head on one side, and from his perch on the chimney looked down at the crumbs with twinkling eyes. Lottie could scarcely keep still. "Will he come? Will he come?" she whispered. "His eyes look as if he would," Sara whispered back. "He is thinking and thinking whether he dare. Yes, he will. Yes, he's coming." He flew down and hopped toward the crumbs, but stopped a few inches away from them, putting his head on one side again, as if reflecting on the chances that Sara and Lottie might turn out to be big cats and jump on him. At last his heart told him they were really nicer than they looked, and he hopped nearer and nearer, darted at the biggest crumb with a lightning peck, seized it, and carried it away to the other side of his chimney. "Now he knows," said Sara, "and he will come back for the others." He did come back, and even brought a friend, and the friend went away and brought a relative, and among them they made a hearty meal over which they twittered and chattered and exclaimed, stopping every now and then to put their heads on one side and examine Lottie and Sara. Lottie was so delighted that she quite forgot her first shocked impression of the attic. In fact, when she was lifted down from the table and returned to earthly things, as it were, Sara was able to point out to her many beauties in the room which she herself would not have suspected the existence of. "It is so little and so high above everything," she said, "that it is almost like a nest in a tree. The slanting ceiling is so funny. See, you can scarcely stand up at this end of the room, and when the morning begins to come, I can lie in bed and look right up into the sky through that flat window in the roof. It is like a square patch of light. If the sun is going to shine, little pink clouds float about, and I feel as if I could touch them. And if it rains, the drops patter and patter as if they were saying something nice. Then if there are stars, you can lie and try to count how many go into the patch. It takes such a lot. And just look at that tiny rusty grate in the corner. If it was polished and there was a fire in it, just think how nice it would be. You see, it's really a beautiful little room." She was walking round the small place, holding Lottie's hand and making gestures which described all the beauties she was making herself see. She quite made Lottie see them too. Lottie could always believe in the things Sara made pictures of. "You see," she said, "there could be a thick, soft blue Indian rug on the floor, and in that corner there could be a soft little sofa with cushions to curl up on. And just over it could be a shelf full of books so that one could reach them easily. And there could be a fur rug before the fire, and hangings on the wall to cover up the whitewash, and pictures. They would have to be little ones, but they could be beautiful. And there could be a lamp with a deep rose-coloured shade, and a table in the middle with things to have tea with, and a little fat copper kettle singing on the hob. And the bed could be quite different. It could be made soft and covered with a lovely silk coverlet. It could be beautiful. And perhaps we could coax the sparrows until we made such friends with them that they would come and peck at the window and ask to be let in." "Oh, Sara," cried Lottie, "I should like to live here." When Sara had persuaded her to go downstairs again, and after setting her on her way had come back to her attic, she stood in the middle of it and looked about her. The enchantment of her imaginings for Lottie had died away. The bed was hard and covered with its dingy quilt. The whitewashed wall showed its broken patches. The floor was cold and bare. The grate was broken and rusty, and the battered footstool tilted sideways on its injured leg, the only seat in the room. She sat down on it for a few minutes and let her head drop in her hands. The mere fact that Lottie had come and gone away again made things seem a little worse, just as perhaps prisoners feel a little more desolate after visitors come and go, leaving them behind. "It's a lonely place," she said. "Sometimes it's the loneliest place in the world." She was sitting in this way when her attention was attracted by a slight sound near her. She lifted her head to see where it came from, and if she had been a nervous child, she would have left her seat on the battered footstool in a great hurry. A large rat was sitting up on his hind quarters and sniffing the air in an interested manner. Some of Lottie's crumbs had dropped upon the floor, and their scent had drawn him out of his hole. He looked so queer and so like a grey-whiskered dwarf or gnome that Sara was rather fascinated. He looked at her with his bright eyes, as if he were asking a question. He was evidently so doubtful that one of the child's queer thoughts came into her mind. "I dare say it is rather hard to be a rat," she mused. "Nobody likes you. People jump and run away and scream out, 'Oh, a horrid rat!' I shouldn't like people to scream and jump and say, 'Oh, a horrid Sara!' the moment they saw me, and set traps for me and pretend they were dinner. It's so different to be a sparrow. But nobody asked this rat if he wanted to be a rat when he was made. Nobody said, 'Wouldn't you rather be a sparrow?'" She had sat so quietly that the rat had begun to take courage. He was very much afraid of her, but perhaps he had a heart like the sparrow, and it told him that she was not a thing which pounced. He was very hungry. He had a wife and a large family in the wall, and they had had frightfully bad luck for several days. He had left the children crying bitterly, and felt he would risk a good deal for a few crumbs, so he cautiously dropped upon his feet. "Come on," said Sara. "I'm not a trap. You can have them, poor thing. Prisoners in the Bastille used to make friends with rats. Suppose I make friends with you." How it is that animals understand things, I do not know, but it is certain that they do understand. Perhaps there is a language which is not made of words, and everything in the world understands it. Perhaps there is a soul hidden in everything, and it can always speak without even making a sound to another soul. But whatsoever was the reason, the rat knew from that moment that he was safe, even though he was a rat. He knew that this young human being sitting on the red footstool would not jump up and terrify him with wild, sharp noises, or throw heavy objects at him, which, if they did not fall and crush him, would send him limping in his scurry back to his hole. He was really a very nice rat, and did not mean the least harm. When he had stood on his hind legs and sniffed the air, with his bright eyes fixed on Sara, he had hoped that she would understand this, and would not begin by hating him as an enemy. When the mysterious thing which speaks without saying any words told him that she would not, he went softly toward the crumbs and began to eat them. As he did it, he glanced every now and then at Sara, just as the sparrows had done, and his expression was so very apologetic that it touched her heart. She sat and watched him without making any movement. One crumb was very much larger than the others. In fact, it could scarcely be called a crumb. It was evident that he wanted that piece very much, but it lay quite near the footstool, and he was still rather timid. "I believe he wants it to carry to his family in the wall," Sara thought. "If I do not stir at all, Perhaps he will come and get it. She scarcely allowed herself to breathe. She was so deeply interested. The rat shuffled a little nearer and ate a few more crumbs. Then he stopped and sniffed delicately, giving a side glance at the occupant of the footstool. Then he darted at the piece of bun with something very like the sudden boldness of the sparrow, and the instant he had possession of it, fled back to the wall, slipped down a crack in the skirting board, and was gone. "I knew he wanted it for his children," said Sara. "I do believe I could make friends with him." A week or so afterward, on one of the rare nights when Ermengaard found it safe to steal up to the attic, when she tapped on the door with the tips of her fingers, Sara did not come to her for 2 or 3 minutes. There was indeed such a silence in the room at first that Ermengaard wondered if she could have fallen asleep. Then, to her surprise, she heard her utter a little low laugh and speak coaxingly to someone. "There," Ermengaard heard her say. "Take it and go home, Melchizedek. Go home to your wife." Almost immediately Sara opened the door, and when she did so she found Ermengaard standing with alarmed eyes upon the threshold. Who are you talking to, Sara?" she gasped out. Sara drew her in cautiously, but she looked as if something pleased and amused her. "You must promise not to be frightened, not to scream the least bit, or I can't tell you," she answered. Ermengaard felt almost inclined to scream on the spot, but managed to control herself. She looked all round the attic and saw no one, and yet Sara had certainly been speaking to someone. She thought of ghosts. "Is it something that will frighten me?" she asked timorously. "Some people are afraid of them," said Sara. "I was at first, but I am not now." "Was it a ghost?" quaked Ermengaard. "No," said Sara, laughing. "It was my rat." Ermengaard made one bound and landed in the middle of the little dingy bed. She tucked her feet under her nightgown and the red shawl. She did not scream, but she gasped with fright. Oh, she cried under her breath. A rat! A rat! "I was afraid you would be frightened," said Sara. "But you needn't be. I am making him tame. He actually knows me and comes out when I call him. Are you too frightened to want to see him?" The truth was that, as the days had gone on, and with the aid of scraps brought up from the kitchen, her curious friendship had developed, she had gradually forgotten that the timid creature she was becoming familiar with was a mere rat. At first Ermengaard was too much alarmed to do anything but huddle in a heap upon the bed and tuck up her feet. But the sight of Sara's composed little countenance and the story of Melchizedek's first appearance began at last to rouse her curiosity, and she leant forward over the edge of the bed and watched Sara go and kneel down by the hole in the skirting board. He won't run out quickly and jump on the bed, will he?" she said. "No," answered Sara. "He's as polite as we are. He is just like a person. Now watch." She began to make a low whistling sound, so low and coaxing that it could only have been heard in entire stillness. She did it several times, looking entirely absorbed in it. Ermengaard thought she looked as if she were working a spell. And at last, evidently in response to it, a grey-whiskered, bright-eyed head peeped out of the hole. Sara had some crumbs in her hand. She dropped them, and Melchizedek came quietly forth and ate them. A piece of larger size than the rest, he took and carried in the most businesslike manner back to his home. "You see," said Sara, "that is for his wife and children. He is very nice. He only eats the little bits. After he goes back, I can always hear his family squeaking for joy. There are 3 kinds of squeaks. One kind is the children's, and one is Mrs. Melchizedek's, and one is Melchizedek's own." Ermengaard began to laugh. "Oh, Sara," she said, "you are queer, but you are nice." "I know I am queer," admitted Sara cheerfully, "and I try to be nice." She rubbed her forehead with her little brown paw, and a puzzled, tender look came into her face. "Papa always laughed at me," she said, "but I liked it. He thought I was queer, but he liked me to make up things. I can't help making up things. If I didn't, I don't believe I could live." She paused and glanced around the attic. "I'm sure I couldn't live here," she added in a low voice. Ermengaard was interested, as she always was. "When you talk about things," she said, "they seem as if they grew real. You talk about Melchizedek as if he was a person." "He is a person," said Sara. "He gets hungry and frightened just as we do, and he is married and has children. How do we know he doesn't think things just as we do? His eyes look as if he was a person. That was why I gave him a name." She sat down on the floor in her favourite attitude, holding her knees. "Besides," she said, "he is a Bastille rat sent to be my friend. I can always get a bit of bread the cook has thrown away, and it is quite enough to support him." "Is it the Bastille yet?" asked Ermengaard eagerly. "Do you always pretend it is the Bastille?" "Nearly always," answered Sara. "Sometimes I try to pretend it is another kind of place, but the Bastille is generally easiest, particularly when it is cold." Just at that moment, Ermengaard almost jumped off the bed. She was so startled by a sound she heard. It was like two distinct knocks on the wall. "What is that?" she exclaimed. Sara got up from the floor and answered quite dramatically. "It is the prisoner in the next cell." "Becky!" cried Ermengaard, enraptured. "Yes," said Sara. "Listen, the two knocks meant, 'Prisoner, are you there?'" She knocked 3 times on the wall herself, as if in answer. "That means, 'Yes, I am here and all is well.'" 4 knocks came from Becky's side of the wall. "That means," explained Sara, "'Then, fellow sufferer, we will sleep in peace. Good night.'" Ermengaard quite beamed with delight. "Oh, Sara," she whispered joyfully, "it is like a story." "It is a story," said Sara. "Everything's a story. You are a story. I am a story. Miss Minchin is a story." And she sat down again and talked, until Ermengaard forgot that she was a sort of escaped prisoner herself, and had to be reminded by Sara that she could not remain in the Bastille all night, but must steal noiselessly downstairs again, and creep back into her deserted bed. Hi, this is just a really quick reminder that if you're enjoying the stories on Willow Audiobooks, it would mean the absolute world to me if you'd consider becoming a patron on Patreon. There are 3 different pledge tiers, all with different perks attached to them, and above all, you'd be helping me to make sure I can keep doing this consistently. So please head on over to patreon.com/Willow Audiobooks and check out how you can get involved. Alternatively, I also really appreciate ratings and reviews left on iTunes or wherever you happen to get your podcasts. So if you haven't done that, please do. Thank you so much. Chapter 10. The Indian Gentleman. But it was a perilous thing for Ermengaard and Lottie to make pilgrimages to the attic. They could never be quite sure when Sara would be there, and they could scarcely ever be certain that Miss Amelia would not make a tour of inspection through the bedrooms after the pupils were supposed to be asleep. So their visits were rare ones, and Sara lived a strange and lonely life. It was a lonelier life when she was downstairs than when she was in her attic. She had no one to talk to, and when she was sent out on errands and walked through the streets, a forlorn little figure carrying a basket or a parcel, trying to hold her hat on when the wind was blowing, and feeling the water soak through her shoes when it was raining. She felt as if the crowds hurrying past her made her loneliness greater. When she had been the Princess Sara, driving through the streets in her brougham, or walking attended by Mariette, the sight of her bright, eager little face and picturesque coats and hats had often caused people to look after her. A happy, beautifully cared-for little girl naturally attracts attention. Shabby, poorly dressed children are not rare enough and pretty enough to make people turn around to look at them and smile. No one looked at Sara in these days, and no one seemed to see her as she hurried along the crowded pavements. She had begun to grow very fast, and as she was dressed only in such clothes as the plainer remnants of her wardrobe would supply, she knew she looked very queer indeed. All her valuable garments had been disposed of, and such as had been left for her use she was expected to wear so long as she could put them on at all. Sometimes, when she passed a shop window with a mirror in it, she almost laughed outright on catching a glimpse of herself, and sometimes her face went red and she bit her lip and turned away. In the evening, when she passed houses whose windows were lighted up, she used to look into the warm rooms and amuse herself by imagining things about the people she saw sitting before the fires or about the tables. It always interested her to catch glimpses of rooms before the shutters were closed. There were several families in the square in which Miss Minchin lived, with which she had become quite familiar in a way of her own. The one she liked best she called the large family. She called it the large family not because the members of it were big, for indeed most of them were little, but because there were so many of them. There were 8 children in the large family, and a stout rosy mother, and a stout rosy father, and a stout rosy grandmother, and any number of servants. The 8 children were always either being taken out to walk or to ride in perambulators by comfortable nurses, or they were going to drive with their mamma, or they were flying to the door in the evening to meet their papa and kiss him and dance around him and drag off his overcoat and look in the pockets for packages, or they were crowding about the nursery windows and looking out and pushing each other and laughing. In fact, they were always doing something enjoyable and suited to the tastes of a large family. Sara was quite fond of them, and she had given them names out of books, quite romantic names. She called them the Montmorencys when she did not call them the large family. The fat, fair baby with the lace cap was Ethelberta Beauchamp Montmorency. The next baby was Violet Chumley Montmorency. The little boy who could just stagger and who had such round legs was Sidney Cecil Vivian Montmorency. And then came Lillian Evangeline Maud Marion, Rosalind Gladys, Guy Clarence, Veronica Eustacia, and Claude Harold Hector. One evening, a very funny thing happened, though perhaps in one sense it was not a funny thing at all. Several of the Montmorencys were evidently going to a children's party, and just as Sara was about to pass the door, they were crossing the pavement to get into the carriage which was waiting for them. Veronica Eustacia and Rosalind Gladys, in white lace frocks and lovely sashes, had just got in, and Guy Clarence, aged 5, was following them. He was such a pretty fellow, and had such rosy cheeks and blue eyes, and such a darling little round head covered with curls, that Sara forgot her basket and shabby cloak altogether. In fact, forgot everything but that she wanted to look at him for a moment. So she paused and looked. It was Christmas time, and the large family had been hearing many stories about children who were poor and had no mammas and papas to fill their stockings and take them to the pantomime. Children who were, in fact, cold and thinly clad, and hungry. In the stories, kind people, sometimes little boys and girls with tender hearts, invariably saw the poor children and gave them money or rich gifts, or took them home to beautiful dinners. Guy Clarence had been affected to tears that very afternoon by the reading of such a story, and he had burned with a desire to find such a poor child and give her a certain sixpence he possessed, and thus provide for her for life. An entire sixpence, he was sure, would mean affluence for evermore. As he crossed the strip of red carpet laid across the pavement from the door to the carriage, he had this very sixpence in the pocket of his very short man-o'-war trousers, and just as Rosalind Gladys got into the vehicle and jumped on the seat in order to feel the cushions spring under her, he saw Sara standing on the wet pavement in her shabby frock and hat, with her old basket on her arm, looking at him hungrily. He thought that her eyes looked hungry because she had perhaps had nothing to eat for a long time. He did not know that they looked so because she was hungry for the warm, merry life his home held and his rosy face spoke of, and that she had a hungry wish to snatch him in her arms and kiss him. He only knew that she had big eyes and a thin face and thin legs and a common basket and poor clothes. So he put his hand in his pocket and found his sixpence and walked up to her benignly. "Here, poor little girl," he said. "Here is a sixpence. I will give it to you." Sara started, and all at once realised that she looked exactly like poor children she had seen in her better days, waiting on the pavement to watch her as she got out of her brougham, and she had given them pennies many a time. Her face went red, and then it went pale, and for a second she felt as if she could not take the dear little sixpence. "Oh no," she said. "Oh no, thank you. I mustn't take it indeed." Her voice was so unlike an ordinary street child's voice, and her manner was so like the manner of a well-bred little person, that Veronica Eustacia, whose real name was Janet, and Rosalind Gladys, who was really called Nora, leaned forward to listen. But Guy Clarence was not to be thwarted in his benevolence. He thrust the sixpence into her hand. "Yes, you must take it, poor little girl," he insisted stoutly. "You can buy things to eat with it. It is a whole sixpence." There was something so honest and kind in his face, and he looked so likely to be heartbrokenly disappointed if she did not take it, that Sara knew she must not refuse him. To be as proud as that would be a cruel thing. So she actually put her pride in her pocket, though it must be admitted her cheeks burned. "Thank you," she said. "You are a kind, kind little darling thing." And as he scrambled joyfully into the carriage, she went away, trying to smile, though she caught her breath quickly, and her eyes were shining through a mist. She had known that she looked odd and shabby, but until now she had not known that she might be taken for a beggar. As the large family's carriage drove away, the children inside it were talking with interested excitement. "Oh, Donald!" This was Guy Clarence's name. Janet exclaimed alarmedly. "Why did you offer that little girl your sixpence? I'm sure she is not a beggar." "She didn't speak like a beggar," cried Nora, "and her face really didn't look like a beggar's face." "Besides, she didn't beg," said Janet. "I was so afraid she might be angry with you. You know it makes people angry to be taken for beggars when they are not beggars." "She wasn't angry," said Donald, a trifle dismayed but still firm. "She laughed a little, and she said I was a kind, kind little darling thing. And I was," stoutly. "It was my whole sixpence." Janet and Nora exchanged glances. "A beggar girl would never have said that," decided Janet. "She would have said, 'Thank you kindly, little gentleman. Thank you, sir.' And perhaps she would have bobbed a curtsy." Sara knew nothing about the fact, but from that time the large family was as profoundly interested in her as she was in it. Faces used to appear at the nursery windows when she passed, and many discussions concerning her were held round the fire. "She is a kind of servant at the seminary," Janet said. "I don't believe she belongs to anybody. I believe she is an orphan, but she is not a beggar. however shabby she looks. And afterward she was called by all of them the little girl who is not a beggar, which was of course rather a long name, and sounded very funny sometimes when the youngest ones said it in a hurry. Sara managed to bore a hole in the sixpence and hung it on an old bit of narrow ribbon round her neck. Her affection for the large family increased, as indeed her affection for everything else she could love increased. She grew fonder and fonder of Becky, and she used to look forward to the 2 mornings a week when she went into the schoolroom to give the little ones their French lesson. Her small pupils loved her, and strove with each other for the privilege of standing close to her and insinuating their small hands into hers. It fed her hungry heart to feel them nestling up to her. She made such friends with the sparrows that when she stood upon the table, put her head and shoulders out of the attic window, and chirped, she heard almost immediately a flutter of wings and answering twitters, and a little flock of dingy town birds appeared and alighted on the slates to talk to her and make much of the crumbs she scattered. With Melchizedek she had become so intimate that he actually brought Mrs. Melchizedek with him sometimes, and now and then 1 or 2 of his children. She used to talk to him, and somehow he looked quite as if he understood. There had grown in her mind rather a strange feeling about Emily, who always sat and looked on at everything. It arose in one of her moments of great desolateness. She would have liked to believe, or pretend to believe, that Emily understood and sympathised with her. She did not like to own to herself that her only companion could feel and hear nothing. She used to put her in a chair sometimes, and sit opposite to her on the old red footstool, and stare and pretend about her, until her own eyes would grow large with something which was almost like fear, particularly at night, when everything was so still, when the only sound in the attic was the occasional sudden scurry and squeak of Melchizedek's family in the wall. One of her pretends was that Emily was a kind of good witch who could protect her. Sometimes, after she had stared at her until she was wrought up to the highest pitch of fancifulness, she would ask her questions, and find herself almost feeling as if she would presently answer. But she never did. "As to answering, though," said Sara, trying to console herself, "I don't answer very often. I never answer when I can help it. When people are insulting you, there is nothing so good for them as not to say a word, just to look at them and think. Miss Minchin turns pale with rage when I do it. Miss Amelia looks frightened, and so do the girls. When you will not fly into a passion, people know you are stronger than they are, because you are strong enough to hold in your rage, and they are not. And they say stupid things they wish they hadn't said afterward. There's nothing so strong as rage, except what makes you hold it in. That's stronger. It's a good thing not to answer your enemies. I scarcely ever do. Perhaps Emily is more like me than I am like myself. Perhaps she would rather not answer her friends even. She keeps it all in her heart." But though she tried to satisfy herself with these arguments, she did not find it easy. When, after a long, hard day, in which she had been sent here and there, sometimes on long errands through wind and cold and rain, she came in wet and hungry, and was sent out again because nobody chose to remember that she was only a child, and that her slim legs might be tired, that her small body might be chilled, when she had been given only harsh words and cold, slighting looks for thanks, when the cook had been vulgar and insolent, when Miss Minchin had been in her worst mood, and when she had seen the girls sneering among themselves at her shabbiness. Then she was not always able to comfort her sore, proud, desolate heart with fancies, when Emily merely sat upright in her old chair and stared. One of these nights, when she came up to the attic cold and hungry, with a tempest raging in her young breast, Emily's stare seemed so vacant, her sawdust legs and arms so inexpressive, that Sara lost all control over herself. There was nobody but Emily, no one in the world, and there she sat. "I shall die presently," she said at first. Emily simply stared. "I can't bear this," said the poor child, trembling. "I know I shall die. I'm cold, I'm wet, I'm starving to death. I've walked 1,000 miles today, and they have done nothing but scold me from morning until night. And because I could not find that last thing the cook sent me for, they would not give me any supper. Some men laughed at me because my old shoes made me slip down in the mud. I'm covered with mud now, and they laughed. Do you hear?" She looked at the staring glass eyes and complacent face, and suddenly a sort of heartbroken rage seized her. She lifted her little savage hand and knocked Emily off the chair, bursting into a passion of sobbing. Sara, who never cried. "You are nothing but a doll," she cried. "Nothing but a doll, doll, doll. You care for nothing. You are stuffed with sawdust. You never had a heart. Nothing could ever make you feel. You are a doll." Emily lay on the floor, with her legs ignominiously doubled up over her head, and a new flat place on the end of her nose. But she was calm, even dignified. Sara hid her face in her arms. The rats in the wall began to fight and bite each other and squeak and scramble. Melchizedek was chastising some of his family. Sara's sobs gradually quieted themselves. It was so unlike her to break down that she was surprised at herself. After a while, she raised her face and looked at Emily, who seemed to be gazing at her round the side of one angle. And somehow, by this time actually with a kind of glassy-eyed sympathy. Sara bent and picked her up. Remorse overtook her. She even smiled at herself, a very little smile. "You can't help being a doll," she said, with a resigned sigh, "any more than Lavinia and Jessie can help not having any sense. We are not all made alike. Perhaps you do your sawdust best." And she kissed her and shook her clothes straight and put her back upon her chair. She had wished very much that someone would take the empty house next door. She wished it because of the attic window which was so near hers. It seemed as if it would be so nice to see it propped open some day and a head and shoulders rising out of the square aperture. If it looked a nice head, she thought, I might begin by saying good morning, and all sorts of things might happen. But of course it's not really likely that anyone but underservants would sleep there. One morning, on turning the corner of the square after a visit to the grocer's, the butcher's and the baker's, she saw, to her great delight, that during her rather prolonged absence, a van full of furniture had stopped before the next house. The front doors were thrown open, and men in shirt-sleeves were going in and out, carrying heavy packages and pieces of furniture. "It's taken," she said. "It really is taken. Oh, I do hope a nice head will look out of the attic window." She would almost have liked to join the group of loiterers who had stopped on the pavement to watch the things carried in. She had an idea that if she could see some of the furniture, she could guess something about the people it belonged to. Miss Minchin's tables and chairs are just like her, she thought. I remember thinking that the first minute I saw her, even though I was so little. I told Papa afterward, and he laughed and said it was true. I am sure the Large family have fat, comfortable armchairs and sofas. And I can see that their red flowery wallpaper is exactly like them. It's warm and cheerful and kind-looking and happy. She was sent out for parsley to the greengrocer's later in the day, and when she came up the area steps, her heart gave quite a quick beat of recognition. Several pieces of furniture had been set out of the van upon the pavement. There was a beautiful table of elaborately wrought teakwood, and some chairs, and a screen covered with rich oriental embroidery. The sight of them gave her a weird, homesick feeling. She had seen things so like them in India. One of the things Miss Minchin had taken from her was a carved teakwood desk her father had sent her. "They are beautiful things," she said. "They look as if they ought to belong to a nice person. All the things look rather grand. I suppose it is a rich family." The vans of furniture came and were unloaded and gave place to others all the day. Several times it so happened that Sara had an opportunity of seeing things carried in. It became plain that she had been right in guessing that the newcomers were people of large means. All the furniture was rich and beautiful, and a great deal of it was oriental. Wonderful rugs and draperies and ornaments were taken from the vans, many pictures and books enough for a library. Among other things, there was a superb god Buddha in a splendid shrine. "Someone in the family must have been in India," Sara thought. "They have got used to Indian things and like them. I am glad. I shall feel as if they were friends, even if a head never looks out of the attic window." When she was taking in the evening's milk for the cook, there was really no odd job she was not called upon to do. She saw something occur which made the situation more interesting than ever. The handsome, rosy man who was the father of the large family walked across the square in the most matter-of-fact manner and ran up the steps of the next-door house. He ran up them as if he felt quite at home and expected to run up and down them many a time in the future. He stayed inside quite a long time, and several times came out and gave directions to the workmen, as if he had a right to do so. It was quite certain that he was in some intimate way connected with the newcomers, and was acting for them. "If the new people have children," Sara speculated, "the large family children will be sure to come and play with them, and they might come up into the attic just for fun." At night, after her work was done, Becky came in to see her fellow prisoner and bring her news. "It's an Indian gentleman that's coming to live next door, miss," she said. "He's very rich, and he's ill, and the gentleman of the large family is his lawyer. He's had a lot of trouble, and it's made him ill and low in his mind. He worships idols, miss. He's an heathen and bows down to wood and stone. I've seen an idol being carried in for him to worship. Somebody had ought to send him a track. You can get a track for a penny." Sara laughed a little. "I don't believe he worships that idol," she said. "Some people like to keep them to look at because they are interesting. My papa had a beautiful one, and he did not worship it." But Becky was rather inclined to prefer to believe that the new neighbour was an heathen. It sounded so much more romantic than that he should merely be the ordinary kind of gentleman who went to church with a prayer book. She sat and talked long that night of what he would be like, of what his wife would be like if he had one, and of what his children would be like if they had children. It was several weeks before her curiosity was satisfied, and then it was revealed that the new occupant had neither wife nor children. He was a solitary man with no family at all, and it was evident that he was shattered in health and unhappy in mind. A carriage drove up one day and stopped before the house. When the footman dismounted from the box and opened the door, the gentleman who was the father of the large family got out first. After him there descended a nurse in uniform. Then came down the steps 2 men-servants. They came to assist their master, who, when he was helped out of the carriage, proved to be a man with a haggard, distressed face and a skeleton body wrapped in furs. He was carried up the steps, and the head of the large family went with him, looking very anxious. Shortly afterward a doctor's carriage arrived, and the doctor went in, plainly to take care of him. "There is such a yellow gentleman next door, Sara," Lottie whispered at the French class afterward. "He is very ill," Sara whispered back. "Go on with your exercise, Lottie." "Non, monsieur. Je n'ai pas les canifs de mon oncle." That was the beginning. of the story of the Indian gentleman. To stay updated with Willow Audiobooks, you can follow us on social media. Just search for Willow Audiobooks on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter, or you can visit our webpage at stephenalexanderwillis.com/Willow Audiobooks. If you're enjoying this audiobook, why not leave a rating or a review on iTunes or wherever you happen to get your podcasts?